David never believed in love at first sight. He always thought it was something people made up to explain bad decisions. But standing in that crowded room on a cold October evening, watching her move through the crowd like she owned every conversation, he started to question everything he thought he knew about attraction. The networking event was supposed to be boring. Just another Wednesday night where business people gathered to exchange cards and make small talk about quarterly reports. David had almost stayed home. After his divorce 6 months ago, these social gatherings felt like walking through thick mud. Everyone seemed to know exactly what to say. While he struggled to remember how to be interesting, he grabbed a drink from the bar and found a spot near the wall where he could watch without having to participate. That's when he saw her. She wasn't the most beautiful woman in the room, but there was something different about her. While everyone else seemed to be performing their professional personas, she moved with this quiet confidence that drew people. Like gravity, she had dark hair that caught the light when she turned her head, and she wore a simple black dress that somehow looked more expensive than all the flashy outfits around her. What caught David's attention wasn't how she looked, but how she listened. Really listened. When someone spoke to her, she focused on them completely, like they were the only person in the world who mattered. David watched her talk to a nervous young man who kept adjusting his tie. Within minutes, the guy was laughing and standing straighter. She said something that made him nod eagerly. Then she touched his arm gently and moved on. The man stood there for a moment, looking like he'd just discovered fire. She did it again with an older woman who seemed stressed about something. Same pattern. Complete attention. A few words that seemed to hit exactly the right spot. Then a graceful exit that left the woman looking refreshed and somehow more alive. David found himself studying her technique. Was this just good networking skills, or something more? He noticed she never stayed with anyone long enough for the conversation to get awkward or boring. She seemed to know exactly when to leave, right at the moment when the other person wanted more. A successful-looking businessman approached her next. David recognized him from the financial news, some hedge fund manager, who usually looked like he could buy and sell everyone in the room. But talking to her, he seemed almost vulnerable. She leaned in closer when he spoke, nodding like she understood something deeper than his words. When she walked away, the businessman stood there with this strange expression, like he'd just confessed something he'd never told anyone. David realized he'd been watching her for almost an hour. He tried to focus on other conversations, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. She never seemed to look around the room searching for someone more important to talk to, the way most people did at these events. She gave each person her complete attention, then moved on with this natural flow that felt almost choreographed. The weird thing was, she never seemed to be working hard at it. Most people at networking events had this desperate energy, like they were trying to sell themselves. She had the opposite effect. People came to her. They lingered near her, hoping for a chance to talk. And when they did get their moment, they walked away looking like they just won something. David was so focused on watching her that he didn't notice when she started walking toward him. Suddenly, she was standing right in front of him, and he felt like a kid who'd been caught staring. "You've been studying me all night," she said with a slight smile. Her voice was warm, but there was something knowing in it that made him feel exposed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stare," David said, feeling his face heat up. "I was just..." "You're really good at this." "At what?" "Talking to people, making them feel important." She tilted her head slightly, like she was considering his words. "Is that what you think I'm doing, isn't it? Maybe I'm just interested in what people really want." She said, "Most people spend so much time pretending to be someone else that they forget what they actually need." There was something in the way she said it that made David's stomach tighten, like she could see right through all the professional small talk and polite masks people wore to these things. "And what do you think I want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, and David felt like she was reading something written on his forehead that he didn't know was there. "You want to understand," she said finally. "You want to be the one who figures things out while everyone else stumbles around in the dark." David felt a chill run down his spine. She was right, and he didn't know how she knew that. He'd always prided himself on being observant, on seeing patterns other people missed. Even during his divorce, he'd spent hours analyzing what went wrong, trying to understand the psychology behind every argument. "You are watching me because you think you can figure out my secret," she continued. "You want to know how I do what I do. Can I?" She smiled, and for the first time all evening, it seemed genuine rather than professional. Everyone has secrets, David. The question is whether you really want to know them. The fact that she knew his name hit him like a cold splash of water. He was wearing a name tag. But she'd been across the room all night. When had she read it? "I'm Elena," she said, extending her hand. "Elena Vasquez." Her handshake was firm and warm, and she held his hand just a moment longer than necessary. "I run a consulting firm that helps people get what they really want, not what they think they're supposed to want." What's the difference? Most people want things because they think those things will make them feel a certain way, but they never ask themselves if that feeling is actually what they need. David found himself leaning closer. There was something hypnotic about the way she spoke, like she was sharing secrets that other people weren't smart enough to understand. For example, she continued, "You think you want to get back into dating because you're supposed to move on from your divorce. But what you really want is to feel like you understand relationships well enough that you won't get hurt again." David's mouth went dry. She was doing it again, seeing something he hadn't even admitted to himself. "How do you know I'm divorced?" "You have the careful way of speaking that people develop when they've spent months in therapy or mediation. Plus, you're at a networking event on a Wednesday night instead of home with someone you care about." She reached into her purse and pulled out a simple business card. It was heavy paper, expensive feeling, with just her name and the words "Fulfillment Consultant" printed in elegant letters. "I should go," she said, glancing around the room. "But if you're really interested in understanding how people work, you should call me." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh, and David? Stop trying so hard to figure everyone else out. The most interesting puzzle is usually the one looking back at you in the mirror." With that, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving David standing there with her business card in his hand and a head full of questions. He couldn't answer. He spent the rest of the evening distracted, replaying their conversation and trying to understand what had just happened. Every other interaction felt flat compared to those few minutes with Elena. It was like she'd turned up the volume on everything, and now the rest of the world seemed muffled. Driving home that night, David kept glancing at the business card on his passenger seat. He told himself he was just curious about her business model, but he knew it was more than that. She'd seen something in him that he barely understood himself, and now he needed to know what else she might see. The smart thing would be to throw the card away and forget about the whole thing. But as he pulled into his apartment complex, David already knew he was going to call her. Some puzzles were just too interesting to leave unsolved. David stared at Elena's business card for 3 days before he finally Googled her name. He kept telling himself he was just curious, but the truth was he couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time he tried to focus on work, his mind would drift back to that conversation, to the way she'd seen right through him like he was made of glass. The search results were strange. For someone who seemed so confident and established, Elena had almost no online presence. Her company website was elegant but vague, talking about desire fulfillment and authentic life coaching, without actually explaining what that meant. There were a few mentions in local business journals, but nothing that gave him real information about who she was or what she did. What bothered David most was how little he could find about her background. No LinkedIn profile, no Facebook page, no Instagram stories showing her morning coffee or weekend adventures. In an age where everyone documented their entire lives online, Elena seemed to exist in some kind of digital shadow. He found himself checking her website multiple times a day, looking for updates or new information. The testimonials section was what really caught his attention. Client after client described her as life-changing and transformative, but their words had an odd quality that made David uncomfortable. "Elena helped me get everything I thought I wanted," wrote someone identified only as Robert K. I got the promotion, the apartment, the relationship, but somehow I still felt empty. That's when I realized she wasn't just helping me get things, she was showing me what I really needed. Another testimonial from Catherine M. was even stranger. Working with Elena was like having someone hold up a mirror to my soul. She saw desires I didn't know I had and helped me understand why I kept making the same mistakes. I can't imagine my life without her guidance. The more David read, the more questions he had. What kind of consulting created such intense loyalty? And why did all the testimonials have this almost religious tone? Like Eleanor was some kind of prophet rather than a business consultant. He decided to dig deeper. David had always been good at research. It was part of what made him successful in marketing. He knew how to find information that other people missed, how to connect dots that seemed unrelated. He started with public records, business filings, anything that might give him a clearer picture of Elena's company. What he found was a trail of shell companies and partnerships that led nowhere. Her business was registered under 3 different names over the past 5 years, each one slightly different but all offering similar life enhancement services. The pattern was weird. Eleanor would set up a company, run it for about 18 months, then dissolve it and start a new one each time. She kept the same core group of clients but seemed to shed others along the way. David couldn't figure out if this was tax planning or something more deliberate. Late one night, scrolling through old news articles, he found something that made his blood run cold. A small item from 2 years ago about a businessman named Trevor Hamilton who died in a car accident. The article mentioned that Hamilton had been struggling with depression and had recently started working with a life coach to help him find direction. David's hand shook as he cross-referenced the dates. Hamilton had been working with Elena's previous company when he died. The article didn't mention her by name, but the timing was too close to be coincidence. He told himself he was being paranoid, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something darker about Elena's business than simple life coaching. The next morning, he called the newspaper that had written the Hamilton article and asked to speak with the reporter. "I remember that case," the reporter said. Hamilton was successful, had everything going for him, but apparently he'd been seeing this consultant who promised to help him find his true purpose. Family said he'd become obsessed with some kind of self-improvement program. "Did you ever follow up on the consultant?" "Tried to, but she disappeared right after the accident. Company dissolved, office closed, like she'd never existed." David felt sick. He spent the rest of the day researching Hamilton, building a timeline of his last few months. What he found was disturbing. Hamilton had been a confident, successful man who'd suddenly become obsessed with achieving some kind of personal transformation. Friends and family described him as changing dramatically. In the weeks before his death, becoming withdrawn and fixated on goals that seemed impossible to reach. The more David learned, the more he realized Elena's clients seemed to follow a pattern. They'd start working with her feeling lost or unfulfilled. She'd help them identify their deepest desires and create plans to achieve them. For a while, everything would go perfectly. They'd get promotions, find relationships, achieve success beyond their wildest dreams, but then something would shift. The success would start to feel hollow. They'd need more and more achievements to feel satisfied, and Eleanor would always be there, helping them reach for the next goal, the next level of accomplishment. David found forum posts and blog entries from people who'd worked with similar consultants. They described becoming addicted to the feeling of constant progress, of always having something bigger to strive for. Some talked about losing friends and family because they became so focused on personal achievement that they forgot about the people who actually mattered. One post particularly haunted him. "She made me feel like I could have anything I wanted. And for a while, I did. But getting everything you want isn't the same as being happy. It's like eating candy for every meal. It tastes great at first, but eventually you realize you're starving." David realized he'd been making excuses to drive past Elena's office building. He'd tell himself he was just curious about the neighborhood, but really he was hoping to catch a glimpse of her. The building was modern and expensive. The kind of place where successful people went to become even more successful. He started noticing other people going in and out of her office. They all had a similar look, well-dressed, confident, but with something hungry in their eyes. They moved with the restless energy of people who were always looking for the next thing to achieve, the next problem to solve. One afternoon, David worked up the courage to go into the building's coffee shop and wait. He told himself he was just gathering information, but he knew he was hoping to see Elena again. After 2 hours of nursing the same cup of coffee, he finally spotted her. She was with a client, a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days despite her perfect makeup and designer clothes. Elena listened with that same intense focus David remembered from the networking event, but now it seemed almost predatory. The woman was talking rapidly, gesturing with her hands, clearly desperate for Elena's approval. David watched Elena nod and smile, occasionally touching the woman's arm in what looked like comfort. But there was something calculating about it, like she was measuring the woman's desperation and deciding exactly how much hope to give her. When the meeting ended, the woman left looking energized and determined. Elena sat alone for a moment, checking her phone with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just closed a successful deal. David felt a chill run down his spine. He'd come here looking for answers, but now he had a whole new set of questions. What was Elena really selling? And why did her clients seem to need her so desperately? As he watched her gather her things and leave, David realized he was at a crossroads. He could walk away now, forget about Elena and her mysterious business, and go back to his normal life. Or he could dig deeper, try to understand what she was really doing and why it affected people so powerfully. The smart choice was obvious. But as David sat in that coffee shop, staring at Elena's business card, he knew he was already too deep to turn back. Whatever Elena was offering, whatever game she was playing, he needed to understand it, even if it meant becoming her next client. David spent 2 weeks planning what he told himself was a casual encounter. He'd learned Elena's routine from his research. She stopped at the same high-end coffee shop every Tuesday and Thursday morning at exactly 9:15. He practiced what he would say, how he would act surprised to see her, how he would make it seem like pure coincidence. But when he walked into the coffee shop that Tuesday morning, Elena was already looking at him with that knowing smile that made his stomach flip. "You're early," she said, not even glancing up from her newspaper. "I usually don't see my stalkers until Thursday." David's face burned with embarrassment. "I'm not stalking you. I work near here." "David, your office is 12 miles away." "I know because I looked it up after you spent 3 hours sitting in my building's coffee shop last week." She folded her newspaper and gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit down. Since you've gone to all this trouble, we might as well talk." David felt like a child who'd been caught stealing candy. He sat down, trying to figure out how to salvage some dignity from this situation. "You've been researching me," Elena said. It wasn't a question. "A little," David admitted. "Find anything interesting?" David hesitated. This was his chance to confront her about Trevor Hamilton, about the pattern of clients who seemed to spiral after working with her. But looking at her calm, amused expression, he found himself taking a different approach. "I found almost nothing," he said, "which is interesting in itself." Elena's smile widened. "Most people leave digital footprints everywhere they go. Photos, posts, comments, reviews. They document their entire lives like they're afraid they'll forget they existed. But not you. I prefer to exist in the present moment with the people I'm actually talking to." She leaned forward slightly, and David caught a hint of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that made him want to lean closer. "You want to know what I really do," she continued. "Not what my website says, not what my clients write in testimonials, but what actually happens when someone works with me. Yes, I help people stop lying to themselves." David waited for her to elaborate, but she just sat there, watching him with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "That's it," he asked. "That's everything. Do you know how much energy people waste pretending to want things they don't actually want?" chasing careers that make them miserable because they think success is supposed to look a certain way, staying in relationships that died years ago because they're afraid of being alone, and you help them figure out what they really want. I help them admit what they already know. Elena signaled the barista for another coffee. Take you, for example. You think you want to understand my business model so you can expose me as some kind of fraud. But what you really want is to feel special. To be the one person who sees through me when everyone else is fooled. David's mouth went dry. She was doing it again. Seeing right through him with that uncomfortable accuracy. You're good at reading people, he said. I'm good at listening to what people aren't saying. Most conversations are just two people waiting for their turn to talk. But the interesting stuff happens in the spaces between words. She tilted her head, studying him. You're divorced because you spent so much time trying to fix your wife that you never noticed she didn't want to be fixed. You chose marketing because you like the idea of understanding what motivates people. But you're frustrated because your clients want simple answers to complex problems. David felt exposed, like she was reading from a file about his life that he hadn't known existed. And now you're fascinated by me because I represent a puzzle you can't solve, Elena continued. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What do you mean? You can keep following me around, doing research, trying to figure me out from the outside. Or you can actually experience what I do firsthand. David's heart started beating. Faster. You mean become a client. I mean stop pretending you're here for any other reason. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small appointment card. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. This is a what-time consultation. After that, you'll either understand what I do or you'll realize you never wanted to understand it in the first place. David stared at the card. Everything rational in his mind was screaming at him to walk away. He found enough red flags about Elena's business to fill a small library. The smart thing would be to thank her politely and leave. What happens in a consultation? He asked. We talk about what you actually want, not what you think you're supposed to want. It's surprisingly difficult for most people. And then, you decide if you want my help getting it. Elena stood up, leaving money on the table for her coffee. David, I'm going to tell you something that might help you make this decision. Every person who's ever worked with me got exactly what they asked for. The problems start when they realize they asked for the wrong things. She paused at his table, looking down at him with something that might have been sympathy. The question you should be asking isn't whether I'm dangerous. The question is whether you're ready to admit what you really want, even if it's not what you think you should want. With that, she walked out of the coffee shop, leaving David alone with the appointment card and a head full of questions. That felt more urgent than ever. He spent the rest of the day trying to work, but his mind kept drifting back to Elena's words. Was she right? Was he really here because he wanted to feel special? To be the one person who could see through her game? That night, David lay in bed staring at the ceiling, turning the appointment card over and over in his hands. He thought about Trevor Hamilton, about the testimonials from clients who seemed grateful and terrified at the same time. He thought about Elena's warning that people got exactly what they asked for, and the problems that came after. But mostly, he thought about the way she looked at him when she said he was trying to figure her out, like she knew something about him that he didn't know about himself. David had always prided himself on being logical. I'm making decisions based on facts and evidence. But lying there in the dark, he realized that logic had already lost this battle. He'd been hooked from the moment Elena had seen through him at that networking event. The appointment card felt warm in his hand, like it was alive. David knew he should tear it up, throw it away, forget about Elena and her mysterious business. But he also knew that tomorrow at 2 p.m., he'd be sitting in her office, ready to find out what she could see in him that he couldn't see in himself. Some curiosity was stronger than fear. And Elena had awakened a curiosity in David that felt like hunger, like thirst, like something that wouldn't be satisfied until he understood exactly what game she was playing and what role she wanted him to play in it. The smart choice was obvious. But as David finally drifted off to sleep, he was already planning what he would say to Elena tomorrow, already preparing himself for whatever truths she might reveal. He told himself he was just gathering information, but deep down, he knew he was ready to become her next client. David arrived at Elena's office 15 minutes early, but she was already waiting for him. Her office was nothing like he'd expected. No fancy diplomas on the walls, no motivational posters, just clean white walls and two comfortable chairs. Facing each other, it felt more like a therapy session than a business meeting. Nervous? Elena asked, gesturing for him to sit. Should I be? That depends on how honest you're willing to be with yourself. Elena settled into her chair with that same graceful confidence he'd noticed at the networking event. Tell me about the client you've been chasing for 6 months. David blinked. How did you know about that? You mentioned it in passing when we talked at the coffee shop. You said you were frustrated with clients who wanted simple answers to complex problems. But there's one particular client that's been keeping you up at night. She was right. Meridian Corp had been David's white whale for months. They were a huge company that could transform his business overnight. But every meeting ended the same way, interested but not quite ready to commit. What about them? You've been approaching them like everyone else does. Professional presentations, case studies, promises about ROI. But that's not what they actually want. David leaned forward. What do they want? They want to feel understood. The decision maker is a woman named Patricia Chen who's been in her position for 8 years. She's tired of consultants who treat her company like a generic problem to be solved. She wants someone who sees what makes Meridian unique. How do you know all this? Elena smiled. I know Patricia. We worked together briefly 2 years ago. She's brilliant but underappreciated by her board. She's looking for partners who recognize her vision instead of trying to change it. David's pulse quickened. You could introduce me. I could do better than that. I could help you understand exactly what Patricia needs to hear, exactly when she needs to hear it, and exactly how to make her believe you're the only person who truly gets what she's trying to accomplish. The consultation lasted 3 hours. Elena walked David through a detailed analysis of Patricia's background, her company's politics, her personal goals, and her professional frustrations. By the end, David felt like he knew Patricia better than some of his friends. This is incredible, David said, looking through the notes Elena had given him. How do you know all this? I pay attention. Most people are so focused on what they want to say that they forget to listen to what others are actually telling them. Elena stood up and walked to her window overlooking the city. I can make this happen for you, David. Not just Meridian, but 3 other clients I think would be perfect for your business. Within 6 months, you could be making more money than you ever imagined. What's the catch? No catch, just a simple arrangement. You pay me a consulting fee. I help you understand what people really want, and you get the success you've been working toward. David felt a rush of excitement mixed with unease. How much for you? $5,000 a month. Most of my clients pay 10 times that. It was a lot of money. But if Elena could deliver even half of what she promised, it would pay for itself immediately. When do we start? We already have. The next 3 months were the best of David's professional life. Elena's insights about Patricia Chen were perfect. She knew exactly which questions to ask, which concerns to address, and which benefits to emphasize. The Meridian contract was signed within 2 weeks. But it didn't stop there. Elena introduced David to her network, and suddenly he was getting referrals from successful people who'd never heard of him before. Each new client came with detailed notes about their personalities, their decision-making process, and their hidden motivations. David's business exploded. He hired 2 new employees, moved to a bigger office, and started turning down clients because he couldn't handle the volume. For the first time since his divorce, he felt like he was winning at life. The problem was, it didn't feel like winning. Each success felt hollow, like he was performing a role rather than achieving something real. The conversations with clients felt scripted, even when they were going perfectly. He knew exactly what to say because Elena had told him. But that knowledge made every victory feel artificial. Worse. David started noticing things about Elena's other clients. He'd see them at networking events or business dinners, and they all had the same look, successful but hungry, accomplished but never satisfied. They moved through rooms like sharks, always looking for the next opportunity, the next connection, the next achievement. One evening, David ran into a man named Richard who'd been mentioned in one of Elena's testimonials. Richard owned a successful restaurant chain and seemed to have everything going for him. But talking to him felt like talking to someone who was drowning. "You work with Elena too?" Richard asked when David mentioned her name. "For a few months now. How's it going?" "Great. Business is booming." Richard nodded, but his expression was grim. "Yeah, it always starts great. That's the problem." "What do you mean?" "She helps you get everything you want. But getting everything you want isn't the same as being happy. It's like, imagine you're starving, and someone gives you a pill that makes you feel full. You're not hungry anymore, but you're not actually fed either." David felt a chill. "How long have you been working with her?" 3 years. "I keep telling myself I'll stop, but then something comes up, a new location, a difficult investor, a staff problem, and I need her insights. I can't make decisions without her anymore." That night, David lay in bed thinking about Richard's words. He tried to remember the last time he'd felt genuinely excited about work, genuinely proud of something he'd accomplished. Everything felt filtered through Elena's advice, shaped by her understanding of what other people wanted. He started paying attention to his own behavior. He noticed that he was becoming more calculating in conversations, always looking for what the other person really wanted instead of just enjoying their company. He was successful, but he felt like he was losing himself in the process. The breaking point came during a dinner party at a colleague's house. David found himself analyzing every guest, figuring out their motivations and desires the way Elena had taught him. He knew the host was insecure about his new house, that one guest was having marriage problems, that another was worried about getting laid off. But instead of using this knowledge to help them or connect with them, David found himself feeling superior, like he was watching children play a game they didn't understand. He realized he was becoming the kind of person he used to dislike, someone who saw others as puzzles to be solved rather than people to be enjoyed. That's when David understood what Elena was really selling. She wasn't just helping people get what they wanted. She was making them addicted to the feeling of always getting what they wanted. Her clients became dependent on constant success, constant validation, constant achievement, and the only way to maintain that feeling was to keep working with Elena. David started researching her other clients more carefully. He found patterns of people who'd achieved incredible success but seemed hollow, driven by an endless need for more. They changed jobs frequently, always chasing bigger opportunities. Their relationships were strategic rather than genuine. They'd gotten everything they thought they wanted, but they lost track of who they were in the process. The worst part was realizing that David was becoming one of them. He was more successful than ever, but he felt more empty than he had even during his divorce. At least then, his problems had been real. Now, his success felt like a performance that would collapse the moment Elena stopped directing at sitting in his expensive new office, looking at contracts from clients who respected him because Elena had taught him how to manipulate their respect. David realized he made a terrible mistake. He hadn't just hired Elena as a consultant. He'd sold her, his authentic self, in exchange for artificial success, and now he wasn't sure how to get it back. David canceled his next appointment with Elena. Then he canceled the one after that. He told himself he was taking a break, just stepping back to get some perspective. But really, he was trying to prove he could function without her. The first week was rough, without Elena's insights. David felt like he was stumbling through conversations blind. A potential client meeting went badly because he couldn't read the room the way he'd gotten used to. Another project stalled because he second-guessed every decision, wondering what Elena would have advised, but he pushed through it. He reminded himself how it felt to accomplish things on his own, to trust his own instincts instead of following someone else's playbook. It was messier, less predictable, but it felt real in a way that success with Elena never had. After 2 weeks of radio silence, Elena called him. "You're pulling away," she said without any greeting. "I need some space to think." About what? David had rehearsed this conversation in his head dozens of times, but hearing her voice made his prepared speech evaporate. about whether this is healthy for either of us. Elena was quiet for a moment. Meet me for lunch tomorrow. One conversation, then if you want to walk away, I won't contact you again. Against his better judgment, David agreed. They met at a quiet restaurant downtown. Elena looked the same as always, elegant, composed, completely in control. But there was something different in her eyes, something that might have been sadness. You think I'm manipulating people, she said after they'd ordered, aren't you? I'm giving people what they ask for. If they become dependent on external validation, that's not my fault. That's something they brought with them. David leaned forward. But you know they'll become dependent. You can see it happening. And you let it continue because it's profitable. Elena smiled. But it didn't reach her eyes. You want me to be the villain in your story, David. It makes everything simpler. Evil consultant corrupts innocent businessman. But life isn't that clean. Then explain it to me. When you came to me, you were stuck. Divorced, struggling professionally, unable to connect with people in any meaningful way. You wanted to feel successful, to feel like you understood how the world worked. I gave you exactly that, but it wasn't real. Define real. You helped those clients solve genuine problems. You built relationships that benefited everyone involved. You created value in the world. Just because you had guidance doesn't make the results meaningless. David felt his certainty wavering. Elena always did this, took his clear arguments, and twisted them until he couldn't tell right from wrong. What about Richard? What about Trevor Hamilton? Elena's expression hardened slightly. Richard chose to stay with me for 3 years. No, one forced him. As for Trevor, that man was struggling with depression long before he met me. I tried to help him find purpose, but some people are too damaged to save. You don't take any responsibility for what happens to your clients. I take responsibility for giving them what they asked for. What they do with it afterward is their choice. Elena reached across the table and touched David's hand. You're angry because I showed you something about yourself that you didn't want to see. You are manipulative, David. You always were. I just taught you to be better at it. David jerked his hand away. That's not true, isn't it? Think about your marriage. How many times did you try to fix your wife instead of accepting who she was? How many times did you analyze her behavior instead of just loving her? You've been trying to control people your whole life. I just gave you better tools. The words hit David like a punch to the stomach because they contained enough truth to hurt. He had tried to fix his wife. He did analyze people instead of simply connecting with them. But Elena made it sound like this was inevitable. Like he had no choice but to be the person she'd helped him become. You're wrong, David said. But his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Then prove it. Walk away from me. Go back to your old life. And see how long you last before you start missing the feeling of always knowing what to say. Always understanding what people really want. Elena stood up and dropped money on the table. I'm not the villain here, David. I'm just someone who sees people clearly. The question is whether you can live with what I've shown you about yourself. She paused at his table one last time. Call me when you're ready to stop pretending you're someone you're not. David sat alone in the restaurant for an hour after. She left, replaying the conversation and trying to figure out what had just happened. Elena had a way of turning every accusation back on him, making him question his own motives and memories. But despite her words, David was determined to prove he could live without her influence. He threw himself into rebuilding his business. On his own terms, he turned down clients who felt too much like Elena's referrals. He started saying no to opportunities that required him to be someone he WASN single quotes T. It was hard. His income dropped significantly. Some days he felt like he was starting over from scratch. But slowly, he began to remember what it felt like to accomplish things through his own effort, to build relationships based on genuine connection rather than strategic manipulation. 6 months later, David was running a smaller but more sustainable business. He learned to trust his instincts again, to have conversations without constantly analyzing what the other person really wanted. It wasn't as exciting as the success Elena had given him, but it felt solid in a way that her guidance never had. He thought he was free. Then he started seeing Elena again, not intentionally, but she seemed to appear everywhere he went, at networking events and coffee shops, at business dinners. She never approached him, never tried to restart their professional relationship. She would just be there, watching him with that knowing smile. At first, David told himself it was coincidence, but the sightings became too frequent, too perfectly timed. Elena was reminding him that she was still there, still available, still watching his slower, messier progress with what looked like amused patience. The worst part was that David found himself watching her too. He'd see her talking to new clients with that same intense focus, and he'd feel a stab of something that might have been jealousy, not romantic jealousy, but the jealousy of someone who missed being the center of that incredible attention. Late at night, when his business was struggling or a client meeting went badly, David would find himself thinking about Elena's offer. One phone call, and he could have that feeling back, the feeling of always knowing exactly what to say, exactly how to get what he wanted. He never made the call, but he kept her business card in his wallet, and sometimes he would take it out and stare at it, remembering what it felt like to feel powerful instead of authentic. David realized that Elena had been right about one thing. She'd shown him something about himself that he couldn't unsee. The knowledge that he could manipulate people if he wanted to, that he could get almost anything by understanding what others really needed, was always there now. Sometimes he wondered if his choice to live authentically was really authentic at all, or if it was just another kind of performance, playing the role of someone who rejected Elena's influence while secretly missing everything she'd given him, standing in his small office, looking out at the city where Elena continued to work her particular magic on new clients. David realized that maybe escape had never been possible. Maybe the most seductive thing about Elena wasn't her ability to give people what they wanted. Maybe it was her ability to make them believe they could choose to walk away. Even now, 6 months later, David couldn't stop thinking about her. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he suspected that was exactly what Elena had planned all along.